So hello guys, and today in the last video what we have done is created a user service, and this user service handles all the functionality of the users that we have created, which would be email, password is approved. That's it, right? And then we have registered this service as a provider in the users module. So we have registered here in the providers user service, and so other classes under the user module is able to use or access the user service. So in this case, it will be users controller and user admin controller. So in today's section, what we will do is we will cover some of the things that we haven't done it before, such as the data transfer from the client. Usually, in TypeScript, you will usually put the types in it, right? But in this case, we for create user we have neglected it, or for update user we haven't done it before. So what we will do is we will create classes, and it is meant for specific objectives. For example, create user will have a specific class type that is only meant for create users, and as well for update user we'll be creating another class for it. And these classes you could call them as data transfer objects, and you will see the so if I'll show an example on it, and I think you will understand what it means of being a data transfer object. Now let's look at our endpoint again. So create user, our entity for creating a user, we only need the email and password. So that's what we only need for this case, right? So what we will do is create a folder, and this folder we will call it DTO, so data transfer object, and in this we'll create a file, and I'll specifically mention the file itself. So I'll call it user create user dot input dot ts. So this file is only meant for creating a user itself. And what we will do is create a class. So let's say class, and we'll call it create user input. And what we'll have is in the create user input, so it's just a name for specific says, like we will just mention that this is a user, a create user, that whenever we have an endpoint called create user, we'll have this type of data. So it will be in this case email a type of string and password a type of string. Now what we will do is we will go towards our users controller. So let's go to this file, users controller, and if you have noticed, we'll replace this any towards create user input, and we will import it. My IntelliSense likely imported it. Okay, it never did. So we'll say import, and we will open and close curly braces, and we'll say from, and we'll mention we will point towards our new folder called DTO, and then we will point towards our new file create user input, and we will import. Oh yes, I forgot, we have to export this class create user input. So we'll say export, so go to the create user input and say export class. So now we have exported our create user input, and let's go towards our controller, and what we'll do in our controller, we'll import create user input. Now we have imported our create user input, and we have put it as a specific type data type. Now we will know that this data will only have email and password. So and as well, let's change it in the user service. Let's go to the user service.ts, and what we will have is we have to change the method in create user method. We have to change it to any to create user input. All right, and we will import it from our DTO folder. So our DTO current directory DTO user input, and we will import it from here, create user input. Now if you have noticed, we are specifically only using as a type, so we are transferring from this parameter. So we are specifically mentioning this parameter. So this class is only meant for transferring data attributes coming from the client, and it will go through the service, which will have a create user, and the service will know what kind of data the user input has, and then what we will do is we will just transfer this data towards a new user entity. So that's why one of the reasons they call it data transfer object. So it is going from one area, from one class to another class, and it is only meant for transferring data from here to there. Now, moving on, what we will do is we will do a similar create user input, similar class data type for our update user input, but a bit differently. So we will go back and go to the controller. So what we have here is update user, and we just specifically mentioned that data will be any. If you think about it, for a specific user, so for example, me as a user, what can I change? So I can change my email and password. So when we go to the user.entity, we are able to change only email and password. But we should not be able to change is approved, and that can only be done by the admin. And another thing would be when we go towards admin controller, he should be able to change is approved, right? On the other hand, admin, when we go to the admin controller, will be able, the admin is able to change is approved. Another thing we have to care about is the update. So update data type should not restrict that every single attribute should be there. It should be optional, like the data email should be optional. So sometimes when the user is updating an email, he should not be able to, he doesn't have to update the password. And when he's updating the password, he doesn't have to update the email, for instance. So we'll create a new file, and this file will be called update user input.ts under DTO, and here we will do export class user. Okay, it will be called update user input, and similar to create user input, we'll be having email and password. But now think of when you are updating a user, you don't have to update email and password at the same time, but you could update email or you could update password. So these attributes should be optional instead of required. So how we do that is, let's go to the update user, and we will have email and string, but instead of colon, we'll use question mark, and this makes, in TypeScript, it makes this as an optional attribute. We'll have password as well, so we'll create password, and it will be an optional, so it could be either, so you could either add email or you don't have to add email. If you want to add password, you could add a password and it will update those kind of stuff. Now that's our update user input. So let's go to our users.controller. So replace data to update user input. Let's import it from DTO update user input. My IntelliSense again tried to do it for me. So go to DTO update user input and update user input class. Now what's next is similar to what we have done. We will update the create user and update user data as well. So we will change data. Instead of doing that, we'll use update user input. Now you might come across, after we finished it, we might come across a problem, and we will see that in a bit. So we'll go to DTO and we'll have update user input, and within update user input we'll call that class. Now we have added it, and now you may see a problem, and when you go to the user admin controller, you will notice that the moment we have changed user service, the data type of update user input, the service like the controller will say there is a problem, because if you notice, is approved attribute is not working for the update user input type. And we don't want to have user update input type as is approved, because we don't want that specific user to update or approve himself. That would not make sense. So what we do for specifically for the admin, we won't make another class, another function. That would make no sense for our usable case, right? So what we will do is make another class, and that class will have this functionality that we is approved. So what we will call it is, this class will be called update user admin input. And in this case, what it has is it has all the attributes similar to update user input, password as well, and as well what it has is approved, and it will be an optional, and it will be a boolean type. So that's what it has in update user input. Now, but how are we able to, so what we have to do in the user service, we have to somehow do it in the update user. We have to have the update user input or the update user admin input. How do we do that? So in TypeScript, what you could do is to change the data type of a certain object. You could say update user input, so the data could be update user input, or it could be update user admin input. So now there won't be any problem with the user admin, and as well the user controller will only care about the update user, so email and password, and the admin can only do the is approved attribute, and everyone is happy. So everyone is happy, basically. The admin control is okay, the service is okay, everyone is okay. So that will be it. So in today's section, we have done some parts of data transfer objects where we created several classes. So those classes will contain all the attributes for several objectives. For case of when you create a user, it will have only email and password. For updating a user, for specifically a user itself, will only have email and password, and it will be optional. So it will be an optional type. And for the admin, he could change the email, password, and is approved. Then we have changed the types in the endpoints. So we have changed the data type to from any to create user input, and here the data type to from any to update user input. And in the service, we have changed it as well. The only difference is in the update user input, the data type will change from update user input and update user admin input. Now you could run it. So let's run it. So I say npm run start dev. Now it will only, so just disclaimer. Okay, I didn't save it. Let me save it. All right. So disclaimer. It just, what it does for now, the DTO just restricts. No, it doesn't restrict, but it just showcases the attributes that the object has. But it doesn't restrict what the endpoint is giving us. And let me show you what I mean in there quickly. So let's open our Postman. So let's open our Postman. And this Postman, similar to what we had before, we have the post. So it will create the user. So it's just send. Now, what we want to check is, so create user works fine, right? So because now when you say post endpoint, it creates user, everything is fine. But when you go to the put, now what I mentioned is update user for this function, this endpoint, this user cannot update himself. So now, for example, let's change /0. So this is the endpoint, that specific user, and that specific user will just add an attribute called is approved and true. So normally it shouldn't work, right? So this attribute should not work and should not be run, or the user shouldn't be able to approve himself. So when we set it, if you noticed, it's saying is approved to true. And it's not even restricting that. So that's not what a DTO would do. It just does the type within the services or within the class. But to restrict it, that the user or the user cannot add any additional attributes like is approved to true, like he cannot approve himself. We'll do that in the next chapter, where we are validating the attributes coming from the client. So that's about it. And yeah, hope this, yeah, thank you very much. Goodbye.